Do you remember the exact moment you realized the villain wasn't just powerful, but inevitable? That cold sensation creeping up your spine, the air growing heavier, the knight's eyes meeting each other without knowing what to say. Because there's no manual for facing a god. There is no training that prepares you for this. And that's exactly what happened that day at the sanctuary. Saori was there at the center of everything, as she always was. The reincarnation of Athena, the goddess who swore to protect humanity. But in that moment, she wasn't a goddess. She was a hostage of her own destiny, because inside her, something began to awaken. Something ancient, something furious. Poseidon, the Emperor of the Seas, didn't need an army this time. Didn't need marina generals or sunken temples. He chose the cruelest path possible, using Athena's own body as a prison, as an instrument of his revenge. Picture this for a second. The person you swore to protect becoming your greatest enemy's weapon. Seiya was the first to notice something was wrong. That instinct he developed through 1,000 battles. Saori's cosmos had always been warm, welcoming, like a silent embrace you feel even from a distance. But now, there was something different. A cold current beneath the surface. A tide wanting to swallow everything. And then her eyes changed. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't subtle. It was as if someone had turned off one light and switched on another. The gentle green gave way to something deeper, older, more dangerous. The voice that came from those lips wasn't Saori's. It was a voice that carried the weight of ages. The silent roar of entire oceans. It contained fury of a god who had been defeated, humiliated, sealed, and who never, ever forgot. The bronze saints found themselves facing the impossible. Fighting Poseidon meant destroying Athena's body. Protecting Athena meant letting Poseidon free to consume everything. It was a perfect trap. A divine checkmate. Shiryu closed his eyes. Not because he needed to concentrate, but because he could unbear to see that cruel smile on the face of someone he loved like a sister. Hyoga felt his fists tremble, not from fear, but from an impotent rage that burned more than any ice technique could freeze. Shun suffered the most because Shun always saw goodness in everyone, always believed in redemption. And now he was looking into the eyes of a god who knew no mercy. A god who saw humanity as inconvenient ants, as a mistake to be corrected. Ikki remained silent. But that silence said everything. Poseidon's energy began to manifest physically. The sanctuary floor trembled. Cracks spread across the ancient stones. A statue of Athena, the one that guarded the place for centuries, began to crack, as if the earth itself recognized that something wrong was happening. And then Poseidon spoke directly to them, not as an enemy, not as a conqueror, but as someone who was simply correcting an injustice. He explained his perspective, how the gods had divided the world among themselves, how Zeus got the heavens, Hades the underworld, and he, Poseidon, the seas. But humanity was always disputed territory, and Athena, in his view, had stolen something that didn't belong to her. Humanity's love. Do you see the tragedy in this? Poseidon wasn't a monster without reason. He was a wounded god, a brother who felt rejected, an emperor who watched his domains shrink while humans built ever larger temples for his rival. This doesn't justify the destruction, doesn't justify the deaths, doesn't justify the terror he caused, but it explains, and sometimes understanding the villain is more terrifying than simply hating him. Seiya stepped forward, because that's what Seiya always did. When everyone else hesitated, When logic said to retreat, he advanced, not out of stupidity, not out of impulsiveness, but because he understood something few understood. Hope cannot hesitate. If hope stops to think too much, it dies. He shouted Saori's name. Not Athena, Saori, the girl, the human, the friend. Because that's what Poseidon couldn't understand. For the gods, Athena was a title, a concept, a cosmic force. But for the Bronze Saints, she was a person with fears, dreams, imperfections, and it was that humanity they would protect. Poseidon laughed, a laugh that made the distant sea roar in response. He found it pathetic. Mortals trying to teach feelings to a god, ants trying to explain love to a mountain. But something happened that he didn't expect. Tears. A single tear rolled down Saori's face. It wasn't from Poseidon, it was hers. Deep down, somewhere a girl's consciousness still fought against the divine prison. Saori was resisting. That tear carried more power than any blow because it proved Poseidon didn't have total control. Proved the battle wasn't lost. Proved that where love exists, resistance exists. Seiya raised his cosmos. Shiryu, Hyoga, Shun, and Ikki did the same, not to attack Poseidon, but to reach Saori, to remind her who she was, to create a bridge of light in the middle of that ocean of darkness. The fight that followed wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, it was philosophical, it was the confrontation between absolute power and human connection, between the cold immortality of gods and the fragile but unshakable warmth of friendship. Poseidon roared in frustration. He had a goddess's body, had millennia of experience, had the power of the 7 seas, but he couldn't break that invisible bond between 5 wounded teenagers and the girl they refused to abandon. And in that moment, perhaps for the first time in ages, Poseidon understood something that gods frequently forget. Power isn't in strength, it's in the reason you fight. The battle would continue. The consequences would be devastating. Sacrifices would be demanded. But in that instant, when Saori's tear met her knight's cosmos, something changed in the Saint Seiya universe. The war wouldn't be won with fists.